You've been stopped for a traffic violation.
I got stopped for a GoPro on my helmet.
And I've told you it's a traffic violation.
That's a violation, so go ahead and get your sergeant here.
And he's been stopped for a GoPro on his helmet. Okay, yeah. Well, what do you guys think? Was the cop okay in pulling him over? Was he justified? Does he have to provide his ID? This GoPro presumably is not physically attached with any sort of screw or bolt. It's going to be attached by 3M tape or something like that. So it's going to be an easy breakaway projection. That becomes important because we're going to look at this. So the first step to determine whether this is even a valid pullover is to determine whether or not that officer had reasonable suspicion to pull the rider over. We really have to look and see if the rider has actually committed a crime or an infraction. It's actually not that clear. You see, most states that actually require helmets are going to require that they be DOT approved helmets. The DOT does not approve rigid projections of over 5 millimeters. This GoPro is clearly over 5 millimeters, but the problem is that the devil is in the details here. A GoPro, although it's a rigid projection, it is an easily breakaway. So if it's an easy breakaway projection, is it really a rigid projection as intended by the DOT? If we look at other standards, like the EU Reg 22, we look at the Snell standard, they are going to allow for projections over 7 millimeters, so long as they are easily breakaway projections. So in that case, is it really a rigid projection? I don't know that it is. However, I did a little bit of case law research on this, and I wasn't able to find any court that has ever looked and decided on that specific issue. So until a court decides, I'm not sure that it's really clear. Even if the DOT wouldn't allow a manufacturer to put on a GoPro, even if it's an easily breakaway GoPro, the question is, when a rider does it violate the law? You could make the argument that the helmet itself is still a DOT approved helmet. When it left the manufacturer's hands, it was DOT approved, and therefore it is still DOT approved. And that this projection that they're talking about doesn't alter the function, doesn't alter the nature of the helmet itself, and quite frankly, it's approved by more strict standards like the Snell standard. And you can almost make the argument that if you're riding around with, say, your visor up, does that all of a sudden make that a non-DOT approved helmet? I don't think that it does. I mean, you may still have to, by law, have eye protection, but I don't think the visor being up invalidates its legality. So the question still is, was the pullover legal? Unless the officer actually believes that a crime or an infraction has been committed, he can't pull anybody over. Does an officer reasonably believe that this GoPro makes the helmet non-DOT approved? I think there's a strong argument that he doesn't. But so long as there's a little bit of wiggle room, that officer can still argue that this is how he thought the law should reasonably be interpreted. If the officer did not have a reasonable belief, then the pullover is clearly illegal. But that is an area that, quite frankly, would have to be litigated. So the next question is, does the rider have to show his ID? Most states are going to require that if you're operating a vehicle, you must show your ID upon demand. The officer does not have to have reasonable suspicion in order to ID you if you are operating a motor vehicle. To pull you over, he does. But let's say that you're just sitting in the parking lot, your engine's on, you're sitting on your bike, the officer walks up and says, hey, show me your ID. Part of the licensing agreement that you have with your state in order to even be able to operate that vehicle is an agreement that you will show your ID upon demand. For most states, that's only going to be if you're currently operating that vehicle, so that clearly does not apply to passengers, but the gentleman in this video was not a passenger. Does the officer have the right, once he's stopped, to ask for the ID? Yeah, he probably does. The rider probably should show it.